Hey everyone, I think you all heard a bit about me. My name is Kai, and each of our panelists will introduce themselves in a little bit. We don't often do panels, but I think it was appropriate given the topic and theme. About every 6 months, the staff meets to do series planning. They plan the sermon series for the next 6 months. And they put a post in the Facebook group asking for ideas for, what have you. And someone, correct me if I'm wrong, posted saying they wanted a sermon on multiple faith traditions. And so the original idea was to have like an imam, rabbi, pastor, walk into a bar. But I was like, why don't we actually have a panel of congregants, people you recognize on Sunday service, talk about how they hold multiplicity of faith traditions, cultural traditions, religious traditions. And I'll say just 1 minute about why I think that's important to have conversation in this church. And then each person will talk for a little bit, and then we'll have sort of conversation between all four of us. I'll wrap us up, and then that'll be it. But there'll be discussion time after service for more conversation. But as I was thinking about preparing for this panel, I realized that although I've given many sermons on stage and been here for a while, I've never been explicitly clear about the fact, this is my confession time, explicitly clear about the fact that I have been deeply informed and shaped by other religious traditions, Judaism and Buddhism, to name a few, like traditions that have been sort of sources of deep spiritual support and nourishment for me, especially in times in which I felt sort of too triggered to even step into a church. I would step into a church, I was always coming to church, but it would still be a bit of a battle and struggle. And I was thinking about why it is I felt reluctant or hesitant about sort of saying that explicitly. And I think there are many reasons, but it can be a little bit of a taboo, even in a progressive church, to talk about being inspired or practicing other religious traditions. So that's why I think it's important to have this conversation in a church in particular, given I think we're also in America where Christians have a lot of political power, and there is, within the context of Christian supremacy, a sense in which there is, no truth or value outside of the walls of the church, and you can't admit to, believing in things outside of it. And I think, secondly, I wanted to have a conversation that was about panelists, of people just talking about wrestling or being curious about multiplicity. So it's not just kind of each individual representing a tradition, like sort of the imam, rabbi, pastor model, but people really kind of going in between categories and just see what questions and possibilities emerge from them. So I'm excited for you all to listen to everyone. I'll speak a little bit on the panel too, but do you want to introduce yourself first, Nish, and then we'll get started.
Yes, my name is Nineesha, or Niche as friends call me. So I am South Asian. Specifically, I'm part of a state in India called Kerala. Community there is called Malayali people. But I grew up in Japan, and so ethnically Indian, but grew up in Japan, and had somewhat of an interreligious upbringing. Our Malayali community was very interreligious. We celebrated Hindu festivals, our Hindu family friends would also celebrate Christmas with us and things like that. So that was just part of my norm growing up. And it was really when I came to America also, I grew up Christian as well, so it was just never in conflict for us until I came to America, got more acquainted with white evangelicalism, and my discipler during college, freshman year, reprimanded me for celebrating Hindu festivals, and it was just such a offensive thing to me because it felt like she was telling me to reject my culture and how I grew up and things like that. So that's when I started maybe confronting Christian supremacy and how maybe I don't really love that. And as I started deconstructing and, evolving in my beliefs and things like that, one of the major things that I was thinking about was, what does this mean for how I think about other religions and my friends, my best friends who are part of other religions? And I think also as I started to learn about the history and politics of like Christianity and all this stuff, like I was just like, okay, these lines between religions are a lot more blurred than I initially thought. So I think now I find myself in a place where I want to explore the similarities as well as the differences between different, not just religions, but other practices, and, you know, really like think about like what these differences can help, like how it can help expand my connection to self and connection to others. I think especially after October 7th, as you know, we started witnessing a genocide, it got really hard for me to go to church when some churches were still like not talking about it yet. And you know, I couldn't experience spirituality without acknowledging like the political reality around me. And so, you know, since then I've really expanded my idea of what is spiritual, going to jam sessions, running, spending time in trees, like protesting, all these things have become part of my spiritual practice. And, you know, I'm still, you know, curious and wanting to be in multi-faith communities and learn from each other. Okay, hopefully that was under 4 minutes. I was really trying there.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Zion, and I was born and raised in Brooklyn to Caribbean parents. I was raised by a single mother who was from the country of Haiti. And I would say in my childhood, you know, growing up around that culture, I was very much influenced because the majority of people that are from Haiti, the main religion is Roman Catholic. So I was Catholic, right? Like I did the whole Sunday thing, going to church every Sunday, being a good girl. Had my baptism at a very young age, right? Did the whole christening thing, had my Holy Communion. That's all I knew. So at one point, my mom used to go to like, also she had a friend that was Seventh-day Adventist, so sometimes I would also go to church on Saturday. So my whole weekends was in church. I didn't really know anything, you know, outside of that. So I think at a very young age, I was spoon-fed religion, right? And like, you know, one of the people that was really influential in my spiritual life was my grandmother. And she still is till this day because she really, you know, told me about who God was and what I was supposed to do. But she never told me, you know, about other aspects, you know. Sometimes curiosity would come up to me and I would ask her about, hey, like, what about people that don't serve God? And she's like, oh, that's not good. You know, that was like her initial response. And one of the religions that some people from our country also celebrate is Vodou, right? But every time that conversation would come up, she initially, so I have a picture right here, kind of, you know, showing, you know, back then during the Haitian Revolution. It's one of the pictures I have. But yeah, so she wouldn't even talk about it that much, but she would just kind of tell me, that's an abomination, that is not of God, you're not supposed to be serving that. So it wasn't until, like, you know, I really started getting really curious about what that was. And I have one of my sisters, and, you know, she grew up, you know, religious just like I did, but her whole views had changed. So her identity and who her God was and what she was serving had definitely changed as well. So when she told me she was doing voodoo, my initial reaction to it was like, oh, you're doing something that's bad. Because that's all I knew as well. So it made me kind of fearful to even have these conversations because these conversations were really not being made. But I didn't realize like how much there's such a comparison between the Haitian church in terms of like, you know what I'm saying, the Haitian Catholic Church and just the Catholic Church as a whole, and how it tied down to voodoo religion. There's so much comparison when it comes down to offerings, when it came down to, you know, people praising, in my culture, we call it loa, which means spirits. So, you know, when they would have like the statues and then they would, you know, kind of put the money in the you know, and just, you know, do an offering in those ways. And also, I had to realize that this was ultimately linked to my heritage. during the Haitian Revolution, a lot of people, during that time, we were being oppressed, and, we didn't realize, I didn't realize how much voodoo played a big role, because there was people like this man called Dutty Boukman, who was a guy that was from Senegal, and he came to, they shipped him to Haiti, and he was one of the people that uprooted and told people, hey, you know what, you're not supposed to be oppressed anymore. You're supposed to fight back. And him and this other woman named Cecile Fatiman, they were the people that kind of started, and they did a prayer, and they did a voodoo ceremony that actually helped people to liberate. So there was opportunities for people like Toussaint Louverture and other people to be able to rebel, and that's why Haiti was the first black independent nation in the year of 1804. So I didn't realize, like I said before, like how much it really was enrooted in me, and I had to start to sense my sense of curiosity. When my sister first told me, I was judging her, but then I had to realize, like, this is the same people that were also judging me. When I came out as being queer, they were saying I was an abomination. So who was I to say that she was an abomination too? So that really just started the conversation, and yeah, so one of the things I said was, we have, voodoo priests and priestess, and the priest would be called a uga, and the priestess is called a mambo, and they also wear different colors when they would have celebrations. And even in churches, when they would have celebrations, when they would have like Saints' Day or those things in the Roman Catholic Church, these are some of the same colors that they will also wear as well. And there was, one of the colors they wear is white, and this particular color was linked to this lady from Louisiana, and her name is Mary Lavoie, and she's right here, right there in the middle. She was from Louisiana, and she also was a devout Catholic who practiced voodoo, religion, and she was an herbalist. She was curing people, she was helping people, and this was a way that wearing the white was a way that they represented her, because she had such a big influence in that world. And this is a picture of me on the right, receiving Holy Communion, and this is my mom holding me when I was having my baptism. And yeah, that's what I have to share.
I'm Viv, and like you, I contain multitudes. I am a multiracial, pansexual, polyamorous, gender fluid, mixed, Jewish, Asian, Filipino, Australian, immigrant, queer, Christian, contemplative mystic. And I live in a commune, I go to this church, I love this community, I work in a very multidisciplinary, multinational collective for social and climate justice, and I have many layers that I cannot possibly explain in a few minutes. One is the ancestral, animistic oriented folk Catholicism of my mother's kin in the Philippines, where I go almost every year to the village of Puok in a clan in Panay in the 7,700 islands of the Philippines, and this is our biggest annual festival in full indigenous, animistic, native tribal gear that we get into every year, and we dance for days, and this is the biggest time of year of worshipping Jesus in my upbringing and my life. These people are dancing in the street for days, worshipping Jesus in their full native indigenous gear, and that's how I was raised. You can ask me more later. I can preach 25 minutes on just this picture. I also could talk about my Quaker, Celtic, Scottish, new monastic parents-in-law who have shaped me, and they live in an intentional community and teach me that we don't need blood ties to form lifelong kinship of chosen family lineage, which also queer community teaches me. I'm also influenced by my anti-fascist Jewish refugee grandparents who their entire families were killed in the Holocaust, and coming from genocide survivors, I join with anti-Zionist Jews to say never again means never again for anyone. And that's why I co-host the Palestine Liberation Group with many of all of you in this community, and more. I cannot possibly share all my layers. There were some things I want to say to you about, like, can you relate? If you, like any of us, you know, are multicultural, are immigrant, brown, queer, gender non-conforming, assigned female at birth, neurodivergent, if you have religious trauma or doubts, then maybe you wonder if you belong here with all of your questions and doubts and multitudes. Can you really bring your full self here to church? And I want to say the answer is yes, because I need to say it to myself. Nap Ministry Bishop Tricia says, I belong in any space that the Creator and my ancestors have placed me. We all belong here because we are here. We all belong here together in all of our diverse voices and multiplicity. And what about the Bible? It too contains multitudes and multiple voices of divinity, Creator, Christ, Holy Spirit, this trinity of divinity combined into oneness somehow. Not to mention 66 books, 40 plus authors, thousands of characters, countless cultural contexts written over thousands of years, like so many voices. I want to say, look, we can draw on multiple sources of divine guidance, layered into harmony. Our God, 3 in 1, the voices of people in our community, the wisdom of our ancestors and elders, our partners, friends, texts, books, the stars, the trees, the birds, and our own inner body's wisdom and inner knowing and intuition. We have many voices of spiritual guidance in our lives, and this sermon is about lift every voice, right? So you will know when it's not like some cacophony of voices, but when it's a chorus harmonizing into alignment. Like right now, I'm being told to rest and be still. It's clear. All the voices, God, Bible, books, friends, therapists, like they're all saying still. And so what about you? What are you hearing? May we have ears to hear and know that this is a community where we can all belong. Amen.
I want to also start by saying that although each of us here sort of are coming in traditions outside of the United States, or even for the most part outside of parts of Europe, one could label a panel like this as a panel about syncretism, or a panel about sort of mixing multiple faiths, cultural traditions, but I also want to recognize that this is something that we've always been doing within Christianity. Whether the fact that Christianity sort of emerges from Judaism, whether you're talking about how in Easter Sunday when we look for eggs, you know, it's a sort of a pagan ritual from in Europe, and so to kind of think of what we're talking about in this panel as something sort of novel and like foreign or exotic in some ways, it would lead to not acknowledge the strangeness within the traditions and practices we always uphold. And it's interesting to think about why that set of practices is seen as sort of standard and normal, to look for eggs on Easter. And if someone else brings in animistic gear while worshiping Jesus, that is seen as like, okay, you're doing something new, that is, you know, syncretic. So I just used up like half my time to just frame that. But I'll talk a little bit on my end. I come from a Chinese Malaysian family. My mom was the first convert on her end, and then my mom and dad's side were sort of fourth generation Christian. And a big kind of point of strife historically for Chinese Christians is the question around ancestral worship or ancestral veneration. Typically, when someone dies in a family, and this is sort of research I had to kind of do a bit on my own, you kind of, the belief is that the spirit doesn't pass. Not only does the spirit continue, but there's still a relation of obligation and responsibility one has to one's ancestral spirit. And so you might have sort of an altar type thing in home, There are certain rituals around going to grave sites, doing Qingming or what have you, or spirit tablets that one observes. And so one of the big points of tension for people who convert into Christianity is if you stop making these practices because you see them as idolatrous or blasphemous or heretical, you are not just choosing to choose a different tradition, you're choosing to uproot yourself from your family lineage. You're saying, I am no longer going to be part of this chain of sequence in which I am. And that means your ancestors are going to be pretty mad, because it's like, you're supposed to be feeding me because I fed you, or I fed your parents, or I fed your great-grandparents, and what have you. And so this is something that has real kind of like disruptive consequences, and I think in some ways I sort of relate to it as a queer person, thinking about what it means to step outside of a certain biological chain. But one of the things that's been really helpful for me in thinking about integrating some of these ancestral practices and my Christian faith was actually through some of my Catholic friends. I grew up more charismatic Protestant, but I had a good conservative Catholic friend who was trying to explain to me the process of talking to the saints. It's like, Protestants just think we're like worshiping them. And she's like, it's really no different than asking your friend to pray for you. And the way you might ask, your mother, your friend to pray for you, you might ask St. Francis, you might ask St. Bridget, or what have you, to put a little good word up there for you, a little blessing for you, perhaps, potentially. And so between those experiences and countless other experiences, particularly through this group I'm part of, this Asian American theologian feminist group, I started to realize that, look, if I have to, and I am really drawn to rituals in the Catholic and Orthodox Church that acknowledge feast days of saints, that have a certain liturgical calendar that is marked by historical events within the church. If I'm going to be maintaining some kind of relationship, let's say with St. Francis, maybe I can maintain a relationship with someone who's like actually related to me, and think about what are the things I might be asking for their help on in the way that I might ask a certain saint for help with. And not to say the practices are similar, they're actually in some ways quite different, and we can talk about in the conversational portion of this. But I do want to kind of note very quickly, and I guess I have some photos which I don't have time to get into, but oh God, all right, I gotta get to these photos. Now that they're on slides. I'll talk about this later. I just wrote this article about my great aunt, but to thinking, and this is a certain altar I have in my home. These are some of the spirit tablets I mentioned. We can exchange slides. I don't do well on this. But it does also say that I feel like the work of this panel and the work that I'm trying to do in my lifetime potentially is to bring together what has been torn asunder. So on that note, we'll switch over into some conversation between all of us. Thank you for listening to all of us speak individually. Yeah, I'm curious when listening to each of us talk, what kind of questions came up, points of curiosity, stories you all want to share, inspired by what someone else shared. And we have like 3 minutes. Yeah. Do you want to ask a question? Oh, you want to ask me a question? Oh, okay.
Well, I was going to just pose a more general question of for each of you, what led to the curiosity, not away from Christianity, but what led to the curiosity? And was there something new or unexpected you found?
That's a great question. I think for me, what led to more curiosity was finding more about my culture. Like once I found out more about Haitian culture and how much, Vodou played a role in terms of them getting liberation, I think that also led me to want to discover more. And then also just seeing it more prominent. Like sometimes I'll go to this, at Brooklyn, at Prospect Park, they also have something, in my culture, we have something called rah-rah music, and that's Vodou music. And sometimes they have celebrations where you hear people with the big drums, and they have all these things like that. So sometimes I'll be at the park at night, and I will hear it. And I'm like, I feel my feet dancing to this music, right? And I'm like, okay, this has something that that's enticing me. So I think that's one of those things. And also just because I'm a curious person. I think like I didn't want to just go off of what people told me. I didn't want to be spoon-fed, and I wanted to just kind of learn for myself.
I loved what you said, Nish, at the beginning about like when you came to America that they tried to take culture, because it wasn't like your question was like, when did you get curious and explore this? For me, it's from birth. I've been going to my family's village in the Philippines and just practicing like that picture of that full like, you know, indigenous, animistic folk Catholicism. And then later I like converted to like evangelical Christianity and a Western white-led church who were like, all of that is evil. But that was, yeah, like my culture. And so if anything, it's a coming back to myself and to Kai's mission. I love that you said like to, how did you say it?
Together what's been torn asunder.
Yeah, that wholeness, like just to be whole and integrated in oneself with one's own cultures, lineages, ancestry, and self, like that is kind of coming home to myself. Yeah, rather than like an exploring outwards, it's a wholeness within.
Yeah, on my end, I think it was mostly catalyzed by just coming out as queer and then realizing that I could not depend on fearing the fact that if my relationship with my parents sort of broke in some way or frayed apart in some way, I could not depend on them to be cultural translators or transmitters of knowledge. I would have to kind of find my own connection to the family tree, so to speak, apart from them. So then that I've kind of become the weird family historian. Like I interview my grandma, I track down gravestones, like I do all this weird stuff. And I think that's just become my role in the family. But I think oddly it has been mostly inspired by being queer and trying to find, is there a way I can remain connected to this larger family tree while also in America where you have already a certain kind of displacement?
Yeah, I love all of those answers, and we were kind of talking about this before, that like it's nice to hear stories and hear like just very personal stories about our identity, our experiences, and it's not necessarily just like, you know, deconstructing all these theological beliefs. It's like this beauty that we've experienced or this wholeness that we've experienced that informs like our curiosity for expansiveness.
I think also to your question, it's really actually been this church forefront, this community that has always encouraged the asking of questions and curiosity rather than having the right answers. And that I've been going here since 2016, and it is still a journey to be brave enough. Even just today, all of us were nervous before, being like, can we really share these parts of ourselves? And like, yes, you can be your full self here. You can ask all of the questions here. You can get curious. It's not about having the right answers. I also love that for a long time we would say, like, as a community, like we're more interested in like unity than uniformity. And yeah, I love that. I think like we don't need to like have the exact same beliefs. It's okay if you don't know exactly how, you know, this and that works theologically, like, but we can be united in community because of our love for each other and our belonging together. And yeah, I love that forefront is for us.
Do you want to share, Nish? I'm curious, a question for you, Nish, and then we'll wrap this up in a bit. But you've talked a little about your life experience growing up and the disruption when you came to America. I guess, what do you hope for now when you think about what possibilities you desire?
I think it's come up in a lot of my individual conversations with friends who grew up in different faiths. For example, one of my Hindu friends was telling me how there's not really a concept of hell, and so she doesn't have this like anxiety about like, oh, I'm going down the wrong path and I'm gonna go to hell. And I'm like, wow, that's so unrelatable. Like that was very much a part of my upbringing and faith background. And I think that's what's really interesting to me, is like what different practices or values, like what do they result in, and how might those results be different or similar. And so for me personally, like one of my friends and I have been talking about creating like a multi-faith dialogue type space where maybe we can just like talk about certain concepts and talk about how we learned about them and how we grapple with them now. And that's something that I really like have been wanting for a while and really hope for.
Perhaps at the end of this sermon or service, we can something like that can emerge. We unfortunately are a little bit out of time, so but no worries, we'll keep talking after this. After service, we'll have like a little circle, and call it Kinship Cafe, where we can chat more in person and then chat over Zoom as well. But thank you all for being here and being part of this idea to do this panel together. I'll do just a closing prayer for us, and I think if you're a little musician person, you can go on stage around here. But you can feel free to adopt whatever posture makes sense for you, whether you want to close your eyes or open your eyes, but just take a deep breath. I just want to say thank you to the spirits of air and wood and water and earth who sustain our breath and bodies today, to our ancestors for bringing us here, to the saints of the church and all divinities and spirits who have guided us, to God who is both above language and culture and yet makes themselves known to us in those mediums. Thank you. We are grateful. You are in awe and wonder. Amen. Yes.
So we're about to sing and enter into a time of communion, and I believe we're singing Ave Maria, right?
We are singing
Yeah.
Ave Maria.
So Angela was like, can you tie Ave Maria to communion? And I was like, yes, I can, because like as we, ponder this connection with like Mary, right? Maria, who like carried and nurtured Christ within her, in her belly. Like I think in a sense, when we enter into this mystery of Holy Communion, we also receive and nurture like Christ within us. Every time we receive sort of God incarnate kind of to dwell within us and nurture that spirit in us. So I think to symbolize this, we're going to come up. Everyone is welcome. We have gluten-free crackers and non-alcoholic wine, and all are going to be welcome to come, take, receive, and be part of this ritual as a collective practice. And hold on to your peace, and I'll come again there'll be a little break in the music, and I'll lead us through receiving communion.